All right, there we go. Um, uh-oh. uh, so I think, as was mentioned, my German is not very good, so I'll be doing this in English. I'm happy to answer questions in English. Obviously, feel free to ask in German, and they'll be relayed to me. I will. So it should be going. Hold on. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to just get started. We're doing things a little bit different today. I'm going to go through the literature review, and then at the end, if we have time, I'll get my clock out here for myself. If we have time, we'll do a little bit of an activity. So, and just so folks know, I'm in Berlin for the year on a DAD grant, so I'll be around. I don't know if folks can see the little window in the side. So talking about the context of this study, a significant number of autistic people are also trans or non-binary. Several competing and conflicting accounts exist for why that's the case. A lot of research focuses on measuring things like the typical 2D 4D ratios, which is, for those who aren't aware, the ratio between your two fingers. I believe these two, and it's supposed to say something inherent about whether you're trans. The same sort of research has been done on queer folks. Apparently it says something about your being queer as well. I'm not sure I find the research all that convincing or useful. Other research has been done on whether left-handedness is somehow related to being trans and autistic, things like male-female brains. So that's Simon Baron-Cohen's research, cousin of Sasha, and whether these are more common for autistic or trans and non-binary folks. Other research explores whether autistic traits are a result of trans and non-binary marginalization, or if we simply don't understand gender and are mistaken when we claim a trans and non-binary identity. Generally speaking, I can't speak for everybody, but the general feeling is that this research is pointless at best and often actively eugenicist in intent. A more compelling argument, or an argument I find more compelling, is that the seemingly disproportionate number of trans and non-binary autistic people may be due to autistic folks simply not perceiving or caring about the need to hide non-normative gender identities. So that comes from, other folks are now talking about it as well, but that primarily comes from Rubes Walsh's work, and they're in Amsterdam, I believe. So my literature review, I'm just going to go over this super briefly. I searched for sources in a lot of places. I searched over a number of different years iteratively, so I repeated the search several times. I'm now from the inception of this subject to mid 2001. I have to update it from there. But at the point of 2000, and you'll see at the point of 2020, the research is increasing exponentially, so it's getting harder to stay on top of it. So I found 3,114 potential sources. I searched the full text of 773. 618 were published between 1996 and, as I said, July 2021. 177 now in 2020 alone, and I've actually discovered a few others since I presented this last. The majority, 396, discuss the subject of trans and non-binary autistic individuals in more than a passing manner. What does this mean? It means they did more than just simply say trans autistic people exist. We have some vague concerns about their ability to consent or their treatment in trans healthcare, and then move on. Here's citing some of the other articles to talk about it and then moving on. They had to talk about trans and non-binary identity in autistic folks explicitly for more than, let's say, a paragraph. So this included 222 research participants, or that should say research studies. That 220 included participants, that were both transgender, non-binary, and autistic. So a lot of those, a lot of those were theoretically on the subject. So according to year of publication, you can see 177 in 2020 alone. It's increasing quite a bit. There's little dips here and there, but not statistically significant. It looks like 2021 will be on par with 2020. Again, that's hard to say because I'm about halfway through, but it's an estimate. I looked at the level of evidence of these studies, and they generally speaking have lower levels of evidence on the evidence pyramid. A lot of that can be explained by the fact that a lot of theoretical early stuff is happening. Obviously, it's not possible to do double-blind studies in most cases. A lot of the stuff is the opinion of authorities or reports of expert committees. And when I talk about the opinion of authorities, things like editorials in journals, opening journal issues, things like that. So very little discusses the trans and non-binary and autistic community. So things like how trans and autistic people create community together, trans and autistic people with who have created groups and are self-organizing, things like that. Most of it is coming explicitly from a very academic, very professionalized place. Check my time here. I think we're doing good. Okay. So what do trans and autistic trans and non-binary autistic people talk about? We may know something is a problem, e.g. my breasts were not supposed to be there, but not be able to explain why, especially to people who expect feelings to be part of a proper explanation. Moose, and this is from my own book, Moose had found it much more difficult to access transgender healthcare as someone who is autistic. In fact, one of the reasons he moved to Chicago was because in his former city, autistic people were subjected to extended gatekeeping, including wait times before being prescribed hormones. Moose had inadvertently subjected himself to this system when he told his doctor he had autism, and as a result was never able to access testosterone there. And I should clarify that he talks more about this in this chapter, but he was told to wait, but it became clear over time that he and other autistic people being made to wait would never actually receive that health care. So it was a hook to kind of keep them in the system or assuage the concerns of the provider, but that they would never actually graduate to receiving that care, which, especially in some place like the US, can be an actual drain on somebody's financial resources, because at some level, at the very least, they're paying for that. So the results overview, the overall literature tends to mention the intersection solely to remark on the concurrence or indicate that it may be a problem when providing transitional care. So distinguishing between real trans and non-binary people and those who might be just autistic. Little orients, as I've said, from the perspective of trans and non-binary people. Some few texts deal solely on the intersection. For example, the Strang one I mentioned, which deals with guidelines, and that's John Strang from Boston. These form the basis of current evidence-based practice for trans and non-binary healthcare with autistic folks. By contrast, most trans and non-binary autistic folks ask for research that explores practical life skills, access to jobs, and marginalization. The community is, as a whole, adamant that neither autism nor trans and non-binary identity are elements to be overcome or eliminated. So this is where we move on to a little bit of what I talked about at the TGEU symposium, and it gets a little participatory here. Feel free to participate or not. One of the problems that I've noticed, and one of the things that got me engaged in this research as somebody who's also trans and autistic, is that I'm noticing that autistic folks are increasingly used by media, TERFs, and other trans and non-binary hostile individuals and organizations to undermine the provision of trans and non-binary healthcare as a whole. The feeling seems to be that it is so incomprehensible that autistic folks or other folks with cognitive or developmental disabilities might be able to speak for themselves, that it is both horrifying that they might be trans and that we provide an easy target to be used rhetorically. Obviously, that's not the case. We're seeing an increasing, as I've talked about, and I actually wrote an article about it recently, about trans and non-binary and autistic autobiography. There's an increasing number of autobiographies coming out from trans and non-binary autistic folks. There's actually one coming out in 2023 called Collectives that looks to be very good. Tons of stuff from Jessica Kingsley Publishers. I believe I always get that wrong. It's Publishers or Press. But it's still having trouble kind of breaking through into public consciousness, or to general public consciousness. And so we see lots of stuff coming out from very obvious and very, very explicit anti-trans folks scaremongering about autism. Recently in Ireland, an article was published in a major newspaper that published a report by their national gender clinic that 90% of their clients are now autistic, which I find extremely implausible, especially since their last estimate was, I think, 23, which is, I find that plausible. It's high for the existing research, but it's not implausible. But to become 90% overnight suggests some questions like, how are you testing that? Like, is that an autism assessment? Is that I just feel like they like trains too much? It's nonsensical. And I think it speaks of the position of that particular team as well. So one of the things I'm starting to look at is doing workshops and talking with folks and talking with trans communities and autistic trans communities and non-binary communities and figuring out how to build solidarity there, because we seem to work in our own kind of silos. And even in the autistic world, autistic trans and non-binary folks and non-trans and non-binary autistic folk, non-trans and non-binary autistic folks seem to work in our own silos, and I'd like to see folks at least exchanging information so that we're kind of on the same page. So this is the participatory part, and I'm going to come out of the screen sharing here for well, you know what? I'm going to let you find that link first and go to the link, and I'll give you, let's see the time here. I can give you about a minute to get to that, and then I'm going to open up the other page and I can show the results being populated. And what we're going to do is you can put in a descriptor and as many descriptors as you like of what you think some of the current challenges for trans and non-binary people are. And they'll populate in a word cloud. And you could put in as many things as many times as you like. I made the character limit 100, and feel free to swear. I took off all the limits on curse words.
I think if you put away the small window, then we can see how it is actually growing, because right now this is just like a still. Yes.
Okay. Like,
yeah,
oh, okay. That's funny that you can't see it growing when you bring up the big one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I should mention I'm also doing another project for Transgender Europe that's mapping trans healthcare across Europe, and I'm seeing a lot of, as I'm sure is everybody's aware of, I'm seeing a lot of both positive legislation and policies happening and very alarming ones happening in Germany as well as throughout the rest of Europe. So I'm going to give people maybe 10 more seconds. So just finish up what you're typing now. Okay, I'm going to let the last one person finish typing. I hate to cut people off. Sorry. Okay, I'm gonna come out of this, and I'm gonna go back to the PowerPoint. slide has to do it from the beginning, but there we go. Okay, so here is okay. So here is from the Transgender Europe symposium last week, is some of the word map that was made when people talk about barriers encountered by trans and non-binary autistic folks. And I think you'll notice there's a lot of unique stuff like the neurodivergence tax, but there's also a lot of stuff that overlaps. So a lot of the stuff that I notice about trans and non-binary autistic and non-autistic or allistic people working together is comes down to things like accessibility considerations. So things like taking care for the level of noise in the room or the level of light, asking people about their accessibility needs and making sure that you can take those into account. One of the things I've noticed when I put on other events is when we ask people what their accessibility needs were, a lot of folks mentioned that captions and seeing the written text on the bottom of the screen really helps, and that this is kind of beyond what you would expect of people that have hearing disabilities. Like it's just kind of helps everybody. So I'm just going to go on to the next one. And this is our last Slido. And it's the exact same code. So the question is, what are some ways that trans and non-binary, neurodiverse, and neurotypical people can work together? And I just have to open that up, so don't go there yet. Sorry about the stopping and starting recording. So this should be our last little bit, and we're doing okay for time. And again, feel free to swear. That felt important. Or at least fun. And as an aside, my dissertation research focuses on, as was talked about, trans and autistic community development. What I'm doing is I'm looking at sort of grassroots trans autistic community groups and looking to interview the organizers. So if anybody knows any groups like that in anywhere, as long as the organizer can speak to me in English, then I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to hear about it anyway, but I can't interview them if the organizer doesn't speak English, unfortunately. I like that, fight capitalism. So funny that it doesn't populate immediately when you bring up the big one. Oh, fidget toys. I love fidget toys. I left all my fidget toys back in Canada. There used to be a great website called Stimtastic that made amazing and very cheap fidget toys. Unfortunately, I think they've gone out of business, but there's similar ones on, I don't know if Etsy is popular here, etsy.com. You can often find, like if you look up fidget toys or autistic stim toys in the search window there, you can often find a lot of great stuff. Podcasts. Yeah, that's great. There's actually a number of really great autistic podcasts out there. And I should actually come up with a list of podcasts. I know that there's a really great trans and non-binary podcast that I did an episode with, but they've done episodes with other autistic folks. I have my information here, but if you want to get hold of me about that after, I can look it up and give you that information. Actually, if folks want to put in the chat window the podcast that they like or links or resources that they like and think would be helpful, that would be great.
Just about to say that we have the Padlet. So I think this is also nice for other people who might not be able to join the session to put it in the Padlet as well.
So I'm gonna give you all 10. I think most people are finished typing, so maybe 10 more seconds. It's funny about the thing about normalizing using fidget toys. It's funny what we consider to be normal. In one of the things I found when I visited Greece, especially like Crete and southern Greece, is they use this sort of, I mean, it comes from a religious sort of rosary, but it doesn't have a religious significance anymore. And they're called, I think, komboloi. And they just kind of, they fidget with them and they play with them, but it has a totally normal social acceptance. And you usually see older men with them. And they're not considered to be a fidget toy, but in that context, it's perfectly okay. So whether or not a fidget toy is okay is really a matter of social acceptability. Okay, I'm gonna cut you off there. I'm sorry. You could keep commenting on that. I'm not going to close it, but I am going to come back to here. So we'll get to questions in just a second, but I'm just going to go really quickly through this. This is a great list of books and resources you could check. And if you see at the top, I had the wrong title. Changelings, an autistic trans anthology is the one that's going to come out in 2023. And they have a website as well, but they're posting updates on their Twitter there. Really good, and I bolded it here. Before you go, know your rights and what to expect at the doctor and in the hospital. And this is a resource guide for trans, autistic, and non-binary folks about going to the doctor and going to the doctor generally, but also specifically to get trans healthcare. And that's from the Autistic Women and Non-Binary Network. They also have, if you go to their website, they did a presentation when they announced it. So I believe they posted that presentation, and there's a lot of great questions and information in that as well. Of course, my book, Trans and Autistic Stories from Life at the Intersection. I always appreciate when somebody buys my book, but you can also find it on LibGen, where I put it myself. So if you know, if you don't have 20, I think about 20 euros, feel free to go on LibGen and get it for free. And memes. There's not so many anymore, but at the last link there is a website you can go and you can see lots of weird autistic memes. And I really want to recommend All the Weight of Our Dreams on Living Racialized Autism by Lydia X.C. Brown, who is also, I believe, a founding member of Autistic Women and Non-Binary Network. It's an incredible book. It has, I believe it's about 400 pages, and it just has dozens and dozens of short stories and anthologies and autistic pieces or artistic pieces by autistic folks, many of whom are trans or non-binary. Ranging in age from an interview they did with like a 9-year-old or a 7-year-old, which is ridiculously adorable, to folks who are seniors. So I can't recommend it highly enough.
So Noah, our time is running
Yes.
short. Yes.
So the very last thing I want to say, and I will put the link in the chat bar again as well, is I'm working with a group of 4 other people to support an autistic, sorry, I'm getting confused, to support a trans man to come to Canada as an asylum seeker. We have to raise 18,000 Canadian dollars, not euros, thankfully. And that all goes to support him directly in his first year. The Canadian government, because the program we're working with requires that we raise that and put it aside for him ahead of time. And all of that is held by the Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto, so none of that goes into our bank accounts or anything. You could donate at this link, which again, I'll put in the chat. Please tell other people about it. And I'm happy to answer any questions about, obviously, about this or anything else. Finn.